the club generates revenue really in three big ways. It generates revenue from ticket sales. It generates revenue from its media partnerships, its distribution of its broadcasts, which, as I referenced, is something that's going to be Apple TV centric moving forward. And then finally, it generates revenue.
Hi guys, I'm so excited for this episode. Those of you who know me know I'm obsessed with soccer, and so this is a major treat for me. I get to chat with Ian Anderson. He's the Chief Strategy Officer of the San Jose Earthquakes. They're a team based out of San Jose, California. They've won the Major League Soccer Cup twice. Ian got his start playing soccer. He played at Claremont McKenna College, got a Stanford MBA. He started his career, his professional working career, post-college at the MLS, and then transitioned to the Earthquakes, where he's risen up the ranks to CSO. I chat with Ian about just understanding the journey of soccer in the US, when it started in 1996 up until where we are today. We chat about the opportunities, and boy, is it exciting. I really feel like soccer is the next big thing in the US. And we also discuss all that is to look forward to for the 2026 World Cup, which we get to host. And just for y'all to know, we've got the MLS Cup starting off on the 25th of February. So make sure to tune in and enjoy. In the meantime, here's Ian. Hello, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Oh my goodness, I'm so excited to have you. Like you were talking with my producer, I'm a big football fan, and I will call it soccer for the purposes of this recording. I grew up in Sierra Leone playing as a striker in high school and love the game. So very, very stoked for this conversation.
You can call it soccer or football. Either way works.
Amazing. So we've got so much to get into, Ian. Are you okay with us just diving right in?
Let's dive in.
Okay, first of all, wanted to set the context of football, soccer in the US. It's not as big of a sport in the US compared to ones like basketball, baseball, hockey. What's your take on soccer's capability to grow in the US and be more popular?
Yeah, no, that's the $1 billion question. And I think, I've spent my career in this sport, and I believe very strongly in its potential and its ability to get there. And I think if you take two simple data points, which are the one you mentioned, which is it's the most popular sport in pretty much every other country around the world, combined with the fact that the U.S. is arguably the best market for professional sports more broadly. You figure that those two things are bound to come together at some point and produce soccer at its best in the U.S. And I think the question is just, it's not if, it's really when.
What will it take to get there? Is it more watching, as for instance, the US performs at the World Cup? Is it other things, women's soccer rising?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So I think it's a bit of everything. So I think you can think about it, right, as, how can we become a more competitive sort of men's and women's national team in World Cup competitions? Because clearly, World Cup competitions give great visibility to the sport. And give bumps to viewership of the sport outside of the World Cup, in years following. And how we're going to do that is we're going to have better American women and men's players, and that's going to be achieved by a combination of things. It's going to be achieved by better coaching and more great athletes getting into the sport and staying in the sport. But really, to allow that to happen, you need a thriving professional league within the U.S. At both the men's and the women's level. And that's, I think a big part of why what we do at the Earthquakes and at MLS is so important, because those things, can't happen. That player development can't happen, which will influence, our national team programs and their success in the World Cups without a thriving, domestic league in MLS or in NWSL for the women's game.
Yes, and that's why we're thrilled for the work that you're doing in developing the players across the country. All right, so then for folks that, again, may not be as familiar, let's give a quick overview of soccer in the US. Can we talk about then versus now? And you can just pick whatever period makes sense to compare against, and looking to get a sense of growth, maybe number of teams, number of viewers, players, things like that.
Yeah, no, happy to. I think always a good starting place for me is when I first started watching MLS as a
Mhm.
kid growing up. The league started in 1996. It started with 10 teams playing largely in NFL football stadiums, which were too big and cavernous and really not built to house the game. It was televised sort of sparsely.
Wow.
I remember watching as a kid on channel. I think it was like 401, which was the Fox Soccer channel, and you had to have a special TV package in order to get access to that. So fast forward to when I joined, MLS
Yeah.
in 2011, started my career. There were 18 teams, um, and the league played in, I would say, at least two-thirds of its teams in what we call soccer-specific stadiums, which were stadiums that were built specifically to house soccer. The sightlines were proper. Um, the sort of the size, the capacity was proper to host football or to host soccer.
Hmm.
Um, and we had great broadcast partners in ESPN, Fox, etc. So the growth between 10 teams and no TV and big stadiums to 2011 when you were 18 teams, proper stadiums, and good TV partners was a big jump. And then now I look at the most recent period, which is 2011 to now. And today, the league has 29 teams across the U.S. and Canada playing in majority soccer-built, soccer-specific stadiums. And recently has announced pretty landmark partnership with Apple to move all of our matches onto the Apple TV platform, which we could talk more about in the
Yeah.
in the coming minutes, but is I think a massive step for the league in terms of credibility and Apple's belief in the future. To your question about the future of the sport, Apple's belief and willingness to make a significant bet on MLS and the future of the sport in the country, and also the opportunity for MLS to leverage the marketing muscle and reach that Apple TV provides. And so, it's simply, as I look at that, that progression in sort of three stages, I think it's
Mhm.
pretty significant.
Ian, I had not realized that soccer has only been up and coming so recently in the US until you just described that.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that's super interesting, right, is if the league only started in 1996,
Right.
right, then the really the first generation of kids who
Mhm.
watched MLS like myself, right, are
Yeah.
now getting to the point where they're professionals and having families, and so the opportunity to see real growth from that next generation is part of what we feel the opportunity is.
Yeah, it
Since
sounds like a huge opportunity to me, especially as you also describe partnerships with Apple and broadcasting more widely, getting it into more homes, having it be more of a household sport that's talked about.
That's right, and I think also, typically, certain consumer products I think can catch on, very quickly, right, as they're fulfilling like an immediate need. But sports typically, and there are exceptions, but sports are passed down generationally, and it's something
Mhm.
that comes a little bit more slowly with time, and that's why, as I say, I think it's a good point to reference. Like soccer and MLS is still super young, and it's
Yeah.
really now where people who've been exposed to a professional soccer league from the first day they were born are now adults and
Yeah.
are passing it on to their kids.
Absolutely. I remember my how I fell in love with it was watching with my dad. We were watching the English Champions League and rooting. He was rooting for Arsenal. It's like a lose lose situation at the time, and we were
Right.
all really into it. But I got the passion from my dad, and then we as kids would always play. So that makes a ton of sense. Okay, so then you had started talking about MLS as the league. It is the top tier league in the US and Canada. What is the structure of teams and games? I know in, for instance, other sports you have like a Western region that plays versus an Eastern region, et cetera. But how does it work with soccer in the US?
Yeah, sure. So there are a couple of peculiarities to the MLS setup. I think it would helpful to start right. Typically, professional soccer leagues around the world operate on it's called the FIFA calendar. So they play matches from August to May, They play in leagues of about 20 teams, um, and there are no conferences typically. So those teams play against each other twice per year, and that makes up the calendar. And then there's something called promotion and relegation that exists between that top flight and the bottom flight. In the case of MLS, it's slightly different. So we have a larger footprint, a larger number of teams. I referenced we're at 29 teams. There's discussions to add a 30th and split into two conferences, in part due to geography.
Yeah.
Most of the other soccer leagues in the world aren't dealing with the level of travel that is required in MLS. So having geographical focus to the matches is helpful from that perspective, but it also strategically helps to foster rivalries, which are one of the things that the league is really focused on. I mean, a few of our clubs are teams in the Pacific Northwest. So Seattle and Portland, for example, have an awesome rivalry that drives a ton of value for the league. And then even for us in San Jose, the rivalry we have with the LA Galaxy, which we call the Cali Classico, drives a lot of value. And then from a scheduling perspective, we actually don't follow that FIFA calendar. So we play from March until October, which again is unique to some of our being difficult in some of our markets to play games outdoors during the winter period. So that's the simple lay of the land and some of the differences that exist between the MLS team, conference, and geography versus what you might see as you reference in the Premier League and in England or other leagues around the world.
I think that's helpful also calling out the complications with the larger, broader geography. Like you mentioned, the other leagues are playing maybe in one country, which is the equivalent of one state. And
Right.
meanwhile, this is an entire continent that teams need to travel across, et cetera. Right. That makes a ton of sense. Okay, my last question here. What are the biggest challenges? And then on the flip side of that, opportunities to the field?
Yeah, where do I start? I think the biggest challenge is competition. I think for us and time. So I'll start with competition, and I think the MLS and soccer in the U.S. face two types of competition, which I think is pretty unique to our setup. So we face competition for interest in sport against other professional sports leagues, of which in the U.S. there are many, and all of them have many decade head starts on MLS. So that's one area of competition that we face.
Very true.
A second is other professional soccer leagues around the world, which we compete with at a number of levels. We compete with them for players. We compete with them now ever more so for fans. I mean, this is another thing that I would say is, when I started watching, I referenced when I watched on channel 401 on Fox Soccer in 2000, you couldn't easily access the Premier League games or La Liga matches or matches from South America, right? Like they just weren't readily available to watch. But now, of course, they are. So there's competition in watching MLS versus other professional leagues. So I think competition is probably the biggest challenge that we face. And then there's time. Again, the league grows every year, the sport grows in popularity every year, but it's still new. It's still fairly infant. And so the question is how can we accelerate that timeline? And I think to answer that question, what are the opportunities? I think, one of the opportunities clearly is our new Apple partnership. And what that can bring for us in terms of visibility. I'd say a second thing is you mentioned World Cups. The 2026 World Cup is going to be hosted here in the U.S. It was hosted in '94 in the U.S. when I was a really little kid, and so there's great opportunity to bring a lot more eyeballs, and people say 35 million new people will be exposed to the game through that event. And then I'd say the other big opportunity for us is demographics. Not just that you have a younger generation who's grown up with the sport now having kids and their kids being interested, but the sport is got a particularly diverse fan base, and the continued diversity within the country from a demographic standpoint is very helpful for us and provides some great tailwinds. So I think those are the Apple TV deal the World Cup, coming in 26, and then I would call them demographic sort of tailwinds. I think those are really the opportunities.
That is the trifecta and makes me so excited as a huge fan. Let's talk a little bit about your story, Ian. You have been interested in soccer. I want to let you tell us since when, but I know that you started out playing soccer in college, and then you started your career in the MLS office in New York and then transitioned to the San Jose Earthquakes, where you've now risen to be the chief strategy officer. So you've had a really well focused career in the field and industry, which is why we're so lucky to have you with us today. When did your interest in soccer start?
Well, I'll have to go all the way back to, when I was probably 6 years old. My parents put me in soccer. I feel like that was the convention at the time. Yeah, I played a lot of other sports too growing up, and I fell in love with the game as a kid playing. And I built a lot of relationships, friendships, etc.
Yeah.
Through the game. And I mentioned the diversity of people that were playing. It was a great way to get to know different people from different cultures and backgrounds around the game. So I fell in love with it as a player. I played in competitively in my high school ages in club soccer, traveled a lot, and then played in college. But I played in Division 3 school, and so the idea of playing professionally was not there. So I really didn't know when I graduated college what I wanted to do. I knew I'd studied economics. I knew I wanted to pursue a career in business, but I also had this love of soccer. And really, the story actually goes, I was talking to mentors, many of whom were coaches of mine growing up, and one of them had said, "Hey, I have a good friend who works at MLS headquarters in New York, and they have this internship training program. Albeit, again, this is MLS 2011, much smaller than it is today. It was more of a startup time." And he said, "Hey, you should give her a call and see if it's a fit." Gave her a call. She said they were looking to hire. They had 20 spots in this program. It was a rotational program. You'd come out to New York and work at MLS headquarters and learn the ins and outs of the business. And so I went, didn't think twice about it, and I fell in love with it. Really much set on side. I had a great 6 months. It was like a crash course in the sports business, and so I
Yeah.
was at MLS, and it was I felt like built a pretty good network of people in that 6 months. And so as I was looking, post 6 months to find my first gig full time, I was looking at different teams that were, embarking on big projects and had interesting leaders. And the Earthquakes at the time were looking to build a new stadium. That was the big project. I mentioned stadiums, and the teams had historically played in smaller or bigger,
Yeah.
not purpose built stadiums. And the Earthquakes were looking to build a new stadium. And they had actually a GS Beer who was running the team at the time, a guy named Dave Cavill. And I met him. I got introduced to him, and I met him for coffee in LA at the Westin Bonaventure. And he was full of energy and personality. And I thought, this guy's trying to do something great
Yeah.
and will be successful. And so I joined the Quakes from there. And that's really where I got my start at the Quakes.
And didn't look back. I love how some of the most meaningful paths we take can come from simple conversations that we don't even think twice about. Like you mentioned, your coach knew that you loved soccer, were great at it, and just said, "Hey, I actually know someone here. Why don't you give them a call?" And how beautiful of a journey it is to do something that you love to do.
It makes, I will say, like, it certainly makes the time and the commitment a lot easier, right, when you love it and you're
Yeah.
passionate. I feel very fortunate that I've been able to find a career where it's super interesting and challenging in the ways that I think all careers can be, but at the same token it's tied to something you're passionate about. So putting in the
Yeah.
hours, putting in the time, that much easier.
So meaningful because it's so authentic to you. I wanted to ask then to give folks a sense of the career path options that exist in soccer for others that maybe relate to you and love the game but may not go professional. What are some of those options?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I think we always say, it's a pretty small industry, but we're always looking for people who love the game and who want to help to address some of these challenges that you've asked about, right? How do we accelerate the timeline for growth? How do we beat the competition? How do we make for a better U.S. men's and women's national team? So I would just encourage people. who are interested, to to do their homework and reach out. And I think generally people, forget your network and your relationships. And I agree with you that oftentimes, the way a career, in soccer starts is a conversation with, a coach or somebody who knows somebody. Don't be afraid to have those conversations, even if you feel you don't have the quote unquote network,
Mm,
because it is a small world and somebody will lead you somewhere else. And if you're determined to get into the industry and you're passionate about it, like we have a spot for you. And
yeah.
that would be my biggest advice.
In ways that even sounds like it aligns with you just mentioned there are a lot of hours, it's a lot of work, it is hard work, it's not all fun and games, pun intended. And so showing that grit and determination can be useful also to see if you're cut out for the job. Wonderful.
Absolutely.
So you're a chief strategy officer, Ian. You're the only chief strategy officer that I know of a football club. So help me understand what that means. What is your role? I know you do data and analytics, commercial revenue, strategic planning, business development, but help me grasp all of those.
It's a good question. I would say that title is tough. It's a bit amorphous at times, but actually the role that I have is fairly unique. And I would start by saying, typically in the leadership suite of not just soccer organizations but professional sports teams, if you look at an NBA or NFL, most leadership roles sit squarely on either the on field product side or what I would call the off field product side, so the revenue side. And I'd say part of what's unique about my role and why I have the title that I do is that my leadership role kind of sits on both sides. So I can talk about each quickly.
Amazing.
Um,
Please.
yeah. So on the on the on field side, my job working with our general manager who leads the on field product side. My job is to work with our team of 3 full-time data analytics folks to help understand how we can use performance data to better understand what wins games,
Yeah. This
what
sounds like Powerball to me, or is it
Moneyball,
Moneyball?
Moneyball,
Moneyball.
yes,
Yeah.
what wins games, what players are most valuable, what players are least valuable, and how we can contribute to the process of player acquisition, or how we can contribute to the process of preparation or analysis of our performance in individual matches. And yes, it's the Moneyball lookalike. And the only thing I would add, to that is I think Moneyball did a great job of bringing that story to light in baseball. And it's a great example of innovation within our industry. But baseball, in many ways, was better set up than soccer for analytics. Baseball has, if you're familiar, which hopefully most people watching are, mainly you have a pitcher against a hitter, and the two of them are playing in a game, and there's very little, or there's not a ton of outside influence, so it's pretty easy to understand the relationship between what outcome comes between a pitcher and a hitter. Whereas in soccer, you have lots of things going on the pitch that are interdependent. So one
Yeah.
person's action is dependent on another's. So the big
It's a
challenge,
team.
right, is how do you isolate individual contribution from what others around them
Mm.
are doing. And I think that's a big part of why we have a bigger challenge from a data and analytics standpoint in soccer, and why it's not today in the place that data analytics is in baseball, and why the movie was made about
Baseball, not
baseball. And I think our hope is, if we can crack the code, that we make the movie about soccer in 10 years.
yeah, that would be beautiful. I imagine there's a ton about even it's not even if you take a striker, not just the goals they score, but the goals they support, the assists they make, and so much more. I can
Well, right,
imagine.
or even right, like in our world, right, we have the things that happen on the ball, right? So we have passes that players make, we have dribble actions that they make, we have obviously shots that they score or don't score, we have tackles or interceptions that they make, right? We have pressures that they make on the ball, but then on the
Mm,
off ball side, we have movements that they make to open up space for others, for example.
right,
And so
right,
how do you factor how do you capture those things and factor them in?
yeah,
And that's a big part of
Yeah,
of
I'm getting so excited as you're talking about this. Okay, so that's on the pitch, and you're factoring these analytics both in terms of potential strategies for the matches with the teams, as well as players that you hire, things like that.
Correct, correct. So that's the on-field part. So then the off-field part, um, at its core, is the club generates revenue really in three big ways. It generates revenue from ticket sales. It generates revenue from its media partnerships, its distribution of its broadcasts, which, as I referenced, is something that's going to be Apple TV centric moving forward. And then finally, it generates revenue from corporate sponsors. And so one of the teams that I oversee on the off field side, on the business side, is the team that is responsible for generating corporate sponsorship revenue and basically building partnerships with companies to support what we're doing. And the best example, the most obvious example that I can give of that is our stadium sponsor is PayPal.
Mm-hmm.
So the stadium is called PayPal Park. PayPal pays us, a royal fee for that over a long term, and they're in it because they're local and they want to support the community. And I know you want to get into that, and I
Yeah.
can share a bit about that. But they're also in it because they want to showcase PayPal technology within our stadium. So when you want to purchase a merch item, or you want to purchase a drink or something to eat, everything within our stadium is PayPal and Venmo enabled, and
Mhm.
um, it's a great living showcase for them of the product use case.
That makes a ton of sense. So then let's talk about the partnerships and impact to the community, because for me, my interest here comes from the sense of, to me, soccer and music are things that bring humans together more than anything else. You look at the World Cup and the amount of viewership it gets, or you look at the Super Bowl and you see people of all sorts of backgrounds coming together cheering on a team. It's just such a human emotion and a beautiful feeling, hence the beautiful game to me. And so, because of that, I imagine that how a soccer team thinks about its community and partnerships must be different from how a normal business does. And then you also factor in, you are nurturing the next generation of soccer players. You mentioned this to be a huge opportunity in the US. So, with all of this context, was curious how you think about partnerships, both with, I guess, corporate sponsors and your local community.
Yeah, well, I think it's one and the same. I mean, I think a big part of our part, and if you look at our roster of partners, they're all, not all, but the majority are, San Jose or Silicon Valley based, and a big part of what we view ourselves as a civic entity. We're something that our community can be proud of. We're
Mhm.
something that is inclusive and wants people from all corners of our community to support and participate. And so when we go to corporate partners, right, we know that we have synergies, in that they're often in the same place, where they view themselves as having civic responsibility, to be visible in the community and to support the things that make, like, a place like San Jose or the South Bay a better place to work and live. And so I think that's really where the synergies exist between us and our corporate partners, and that we are aligned on that
Front.
goal for the local community. Exactly.
Yeah, and there's something about having a sense of pride to be from San Jose, associating with the San Jose earthquakes, and then going to PayPal Park. And I know something that you worked on since you've been with the team is really tapping into the Silicon Valley companies and becoming a part of that culture and partnerships.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, and when I rejoined the Quakes in 2019 after going to business school, and we really didn't have any big tech partners, as you mentioned, and really
Which is crazy if you think about it.
it was surprising, but
Yeah.
we took, like, with the pandemic hit, and we really had a chance to take a step back and say, like, well, this should happen, right? There's tons of synergies. Like, what do we need to do? What's the right message? What are those synergies? And that's where we really landed on, community as something that we could all rally around, like the desire to invest in San Jose. We talk a little bit about the specifics of San Jose, but then secondarily, like, how can we showcase technology, within our venue, within our club. And so we've ended up with, obviously PayPal, I mentioned,
Yeah.
We have a big partnership now with Adobe, Roku, Uber, Dropbox, um, and we're really proud of that.
Beautiful. All right, let's talk about the World Cup 2026. I don't know about you, Ian, but I can't wait. I'm so excited.
I cannot wait. Lot to do between now and then, but yes, I can.
Yeah, lots to do. And again, that is wild that the last time the World Cup was hosted here, it sounds like we didn't have a league, right?
Correct. And actually, I'll start with that. That World Cup in '94 really was the impetus to create
Mm,
Major League Soccer. So, there had been leagues in the U.S. previous to 1994 that had started and then folded. There was the NASL in the '70s. There were indoor leagues, but it was really the 1994 World Cup that spurred the creation of MLS in '96.
so then what's the work that we need to get done to get ready?
Well, to get ready, I mean, I think the good thing is, right, from an infrastructure standpoint, the U.S. is pretty much ready today. We have some of the best stadiums in the world, and associated infrastructure. So I think we're
Can I
good.
ask, can I double click on that? Are these going to be football stadiums as in American football, or are they specifically soccer stadiums that are
Uh,
meant?
Good question. They'll mostly be at football stadiums because FIFA requires the larger capacities. And again, the stadiums that MLS teams plan are typically 20 to 25,000 seats, which is better suited to the demand,
Mhm.
and also better suited to creating an intimate environment. And by the way, that
Yeah,
would be true of the vast majority of soccer stadiums or club soccer stadiums around the world. But for the World Cup, yeah, you have to play in 60, 70,000 seat venues. They'll be at NFL stadiums mostly.
makes sense. So it sounds like infrastructure wise, we're ready.
Right. So then the question is, right, what more can we do to A, grow the profile of the sport, and then B, field a more competitive, team, or as competitive a team as possible to hopefully go deep into the World Cup.
Yeah.
I mean, on the latter, I will say this, if anyone watched the 2022 World Cup in Qatar in November, for me is the most talented, U.S. team we've ever had, and the vast majority, I would say, of the players who played in the 2022 World Cup will play in the 2026 World Cup. We had a particularly young team,
Hmm.
and those players are playing all over the world. Right, some are here in MLS, but some are at big clubs at Chelsea,
Yeah.
in Europe,
Playing
and
with some of the best, which is incredible.
right. And, so those guys are going to be, if they were 22, 23, 24 today, they're going to be 26, 27, 28, and 26 really in their prime. So, I think we're well positioned to be competitive there because we have a good nucleus of young players who are playing at a high level now. And
Let's go.
so let's go. I agree. And then I think what can we do to grow the profile between now and then? This is where, I think MLS is right at the heart of that, right? And I referenced, right, some of the opportunities that we
Yeah.
have with Apple TV coming online for the next 5 years, and that really increasing, our profile and our distribution, and then the work that we do, right, at the club levels of 29 teams, to continue to invest in our on-field products, as well as our stadium experiences, so that
Yeah.
more people can see good soccer, can have a fun time in the stadiums, and that brings the awareness to them of the sport heading into the World Cup in '26.
Yeah. It feels like we've got a ton of momentum. Do you know how the stadiums are being selected and how the decision to have it across Canada, US, and Mexico was made? Is it because soccer is maybe less popular currently today in Canada and the US, or something else?
I think the thought was, a unified bid between the three countries because they had to bid, as a unit. The U.S., Canada, and Mexico bid against others, and FIFA has a process for selecting who hosts. So I think it was just conceptually a very strong bid that they felt
Okay.
gave them the best chance. In terms of the venues, then a sub process, happened once the U.S., Canada, Mexico bid was selected. Then a sub process happened where cities in both the U.S., Mexico, and Canada bid to host, and the bid host process is, as you can imagine, it was showcasing venues, showcasing infrastructure, showcasing corporate sponsorship support, showcasing local grassroots soccer interest infrastructure. And actually, the Earthquakes participated in the Bay Area bid to host.
Wow.
And obviously, the Bay Area is one of which is great and great for the Quakes. The Bay Area was selected as one of the host cities for the World Cup with the games at Levi's, the 49ers stadium.
In San Francisco.
It's down here, actually. It's in Santa Clara.
Oh,
It's well known, yeah. The 49ers stadiums in San Francisco 49ers play in Santa Clara.
okay. Well, that's exciting. I wanted to talk about hot takes for World Cup 2026. 1000%. Let's go, Team USA. We're going to come out strong. Do you have any hot takes about players or anything else? My not so original one on players is that we're going to have Kylian Mbappe be one of the best players of all time. He also, fun fact, has a little brother who's also very good, Ethan. And so maybe there'll be two Mbappes that are magnificent players. But I'll turn it over to you.
Whew, I mean, I think there's a lot of things to think about. So, yeah, I mean, Mbappe is one of the best in the world now. Certainly will be then. His performance in the World Cup final was unreal.
Yeah.
But I could see a lot of storylines. I mean, one that I think is interesting to think about is the field is going to be expanded. So currently there are 32 teams and moving to a 48 team field in 26. So I think that will create a slightly different dynamic, right? More teams. What does that mean for sort of competitive balance? And
Yeah.
historically it's been get out of the group, and that's really hard. Like, how does that change that? So I think that's one thing to consider. I mean, other big storylines would be, right, the U.S. team and how much it changes between now and 26. Like I said, really strong foundation that we have in place now. Will some of the big players like Leo Messi, will he come back and play in I don't know if it's fifth or sixth World Cup? I can't even remember now. And he'd be 39 or 38
Yeah.
at that point.
Yeah.
So I think there's lots of really interesting storylines. Yeah, like I said, there's a lot to do between now and then, but it will be an amazing event, and I'm super looking forward to it.
Yeah, it makes me think of the analytics again, and there's so many interconnected things at play and variables, and very hard to predict. But for sure, what will happen is it'll be a blast. All right, let's go back to the rise of soccer. I wanted to chat about content and what opportunities that may hold for US soccer in the context of relative to how popular it is globally. We talked about the Apple deal several times already. I wanted to get your take on the opportunity for streaming content on avenues like Apple, Netflix, etc. One example that feels really interesting to me is Formula One, and how it was relatively unknown before the Netflix show. And now we're all going to see Formula One. We live in Austin, we've been to it, and it's really brought the sport on the map. So curious, with this Apple deal, etc., and being a strategy leader, what your thoughts are on the opportunities with content for popularity of soccer.
It's a good question. That is a great example of breakthrough content.
Yeah.
And I would be misrepresenting myself if I had the golden, right, the golden ball, the golden idea.
Yeah.
I would share. I think that so right, Ted Lasso is probably the thing that
Yeah.
I think that maybe the mainstream
Version of that.
right, sports fan might recognize it. And look, I think while I said that there is a competitive nature that exists of, hey, am I following MLS? Am I following the Premier League? Am I following La Liga? I do think in general, more soccer related content is good. And so I think in ways I might answer your question by saying the more soccer content in whatever form it might be that we can bring to the most number of eyeballs. And again, this is where I think Apple's penetration and installed base are so helpful for us. But the more soccer content we could put in front of people, that sort of is going to lift all boats.
Yeah, totally.
And then I think the other thing I'd say is, we do have a relatively younger demographic, as I referenced, right? So like if our generation is right on the older end, right, of the fan base, which might be a bit of a stretch, but our fan base is generally younger than, for example, the NFL fan base or the Major League Baseball fan base. And so, streaming is what we know, right? And social content is very much what we consume. And so I think MLS, the Quakes in particular, we've invested hugely in our people and our capabilities in developing and distributing social content. And so I think our strategy is let's immerse people with that
Yeah.
content and be great there. And I think that's a big content opportunity that we have.
Interesting thing that I wanted to bring up as well is Ryan Reynolds just bought a soccer team. This is not in the US, Wrexham, and he has a show about it. And that also felt really smart to me. Do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, no, super cool. And it's also a lot of American investors are sort of not a tangent but separate topic. Like a lot of American investors, are taking positions in soccer teams around the world. Notwithstanding the great investors in MLS, but
Yeah.
are taking positions in soccer clubs around the world, which is giving it more visibility. And yeah, no, I think that's a great.
Yeah.
It's a great ploy for him for sure.
Yeah. Sounds like because we tend to have had business folks invest in teams like basketball, for instance, like you have Mark Cuban who owns
Yep,
a basketball team. And it sounds like we're getting others who are very interested in soccer starting to own teams and bring more visibility into it.
that's right.
All right. All right, Ian, I want to talk about resources as we close and leave folks with things that they can take away. We definitely know that soccer is the next big thing. And so for parents and kids for parents of kids who are interested in soccer, how do they get their kids into soccer? What should they be aware of in nurturing their kids' career, either while on the field or off the field?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, I can speak from my personal experience, and I think you know, for my kids or for a parent, like you put your kids in the game, and they gotta love it, right?
Yeah.
And that's where it starts. But if they do, right, then I think, like I mentioned, a big part of creating the infrastructure that we need to sort of nourish great players is a great professional league, and that's both at the men's and the women's level. And so I think the biggest thing you can do, and this might sound self-serving, but the biggest thing you could do, once you're in the game, for example, your kid's in the game or you're in the game, is support your local pro teams, right? In the NWSL and the women's league, and in an MLS the men's team in the men's league. Buy tickets, watch the games, and honestly, it's not just because that's the support that's needed to grow the game, but because we've got great stadiums, great players, and great fan environments that are super inclusive and fun. And so I think if I were to simply put it, that's what we need. We need people who love the game to continue to play, and those that are playing, we need them to support their local men's and women's professional teams, and that's going to be the linchpin to growth.
And also, Ian is an example of a career path off the field. So you can explore those as well.
That's exactly right.
I love that you mentioned women. And I wanted to talk also about how do parents empower their daughters to become the next Megan Rapinoe, the next female soccer star.
Both at the men's and the women's level, we're striving to be the best, striving to have the best leagues, best national teams, and that's a super exciting opportunity. And obviously, the U.S. women at the national team level are the best in the world,
Phenomenal.
the best in the world. And I would imagine that the motivation to be a part of that and to continue it would be really strong. And yeah, and then the only other thing I would say, as I just said, is it's really important that the NWSL continues, like MLS, continues to grow. And for that to happen, needs the people who love the game to support it. And so for young girls who are playing and want to play at that next level, like obviously there's the train hard and dream big, but then there's also the go support your local team.
All right. And then let's close with this. We know that soccer around the world is described as a beautiful game. It brings humans together from all walks of life. What does soccer mean to you, Ian?
Wow, profound. Um, and I'll answer it in probably a pretty profound way. I mean, for me, it's everything, right? It's been my my childhood, my college career, my profession. It's where I've made my friendships. It's what we did as a family, and like I said, it's opened my eyes to lots of different things that I truly wouldn't have been exposed to. Traveling the world, to see soccer and experience soccer, both as a player and now working in the game. So I think it's meant pretty much, everything to me. And it makes this journey all the more exciting. So
To a beautiful journey. Ian,
thanks
that
for
was
that.
such a wonderful way to end. It was phenomenal to have you. I had so much fun and I learned a lot about US soccer. So thank you.
Good. I'm glad you did. And we'll definitely have to get you out to Austin FC.
All right. Woo, that was amazing. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you like what you hear, leave a review and share.